The Non-Proliferation Conference was held in Moscow on October 20th and 21st, and expectations were high on this meeting. South and North Korean officials and U.S. nuclear experts joined the event to discuss the issues on the Korean Peninsula. Some raised the possibilities of a formal meeting between the diplomats of the two Koreas, but it did not happen. Still, North Korea is repeating its position, saying that the United States should recognize them as a nuclear state. According to experts, maybe the reclusive state is neither ready to talk nor willing to return to the six-party talks. Meanwhile, Russia, which held the International Forum on Non-Proliferation, has stepped in and is playing a moderating role. But was Moscow not strong enough to persuade Pyongyang? Or is it simply that Russia is not the answer to solve the North Korea's nuclear problem? Today on Peninsula 24, we will delve into this question. For today's discussion, we have two experts in the studio. To my left, we have a guest, Dr. Seung-yeol, Research Fellow at the National Assembly Research Service. Dr. Lee, thank you for joining us in the studio.
Thank you very much.
And as always in the studio with me is Dr. Kim Chang-su. Dr. Kim, it's great to see you this week.
Thank you for having me again. Thank you.
Okay, so much anticipated talks between the United States and North Korea did not happen. There was a lot of expectations because there's a North Korean representative, Choi Sun-hee, who is the Director General of North America Bureau of North Korea's Foreign Ministry, and also the South Korean side, Lee Sang-hwa, the South Korean Director General of the North Korean Nuclear Affairs. And there are a lot of nuclear experts from the United States as well. And also President Putin, he condemned the North Korea's nuclear tests, and also emphasizing that all the crises should be resolved through the diplomacy and the dialogue. So it seems like everything was ready, but North Korea basically, didn't really talk and disregarded the talk with the South Korea and the United States. So it seems like that North Korea was not really ready and even not thinking about talking to either side in the first place.
I think we need to consider to understand the North Korea's real intention to the North Korea's final purpose is from this provocation, nuclear provocation. The first, I think, is the North Korea needed to be recognized as a nuclear powers by the U.S. And the second is that North Korea want to conclude the peace treaty with the U.S. This is the best way to guarantee the regime security. As a third is finally they lead to U.S. withdrawals of the U.S. troops in from South Korea. So from the beginning, North Korea only wanted to have a dialogue bilaterally the U.S. But U.S. has no interest in to dialogue with the North, I think.
At this point?
Yeah.
So when do you think the North Korea then is ready to talk to the U.S.? Because there are some chances and opportunities, but they basically disregarded them.
Yeah, as Choi Sun-yeol admitted, there has been an informal, 1.5 kind of dialogue between Washington and Pyongyang. That's true. But at the official, at much higher level, there has been no such talk because the United States is not ready to talk to with Pyongyang unless they abstain from provoking another missiles and finally abandoning its nuclear programs. But it's very clear, and this policy from both sides, Washington and Pyongyang, has been very consistent. Unless you stop this, we are not going to talk to you. 2017 Non-Proliferation Conference, there has some expectation because North Korean representative coming to Russia, and also we South Koreans sending our representative to there. So chances are that they might have a chance to talk, not maybe at least some context between North Koreans and South Koreans.
But they say they hi to each other.
They hi to each other. But I think it's made it very clear because really this time Russia really wants to play a mediator role, but it didn't come out this time. So far we have to wait, because China and United States and even Russia, they are really trying to play a kind of role to calm down and the tensions on the peninsula and becoming a very benign in the negotiator between. So let's wait and see what's the next step should be by the North Korean leadership and also Washington and Seoul and also Russia and Beijing as well.
I see. Yeah. Well, but the Choi Sun-hee, the Director General of the North Korea's Foreign Ministry North American Bureau, she actually said that North Korea's nuclear weapons are non-negotiable.
DPRK's nuclear weapons are non-negotiable unless the U.S. is prepared to coexist with the nuclear DPRK, because this is the only way to ensure lasting peace on the Korean Peninsula and the stability and security in the Northeast Asia.
DPRK's nuclear weapons are non-negotiable.
And if you want to talk, I think she's talking to the United States. If you want to talk, then you have to admit that the fact that coexistence of the United States and North Korea, particularly the nuclear DPRK, unless you admit that, then the North Korea is not going to talk. And also, she said that the Pyongyang is not going to return to any multilateral talk. I think she's talking about six-party talks.
That's right.
So it seems like that they have to be recognized as a nuclear state, and that's one condition to talk. And also, they're not interested in multilateral talk, but they are going to only talk to the United States one-on-one. I mean, am I right?
That's right. All the Choi Sun-hee said is right at the moment, or at least in the near future, because to them, this kind of talks is non-negotiable. I mean, the abandoning the nuclear weapons program is non-negotiable. That's true. But our goal is, after long run, there's got to be a time when they really come into the negotiating table for talk about the abandoning this nuclear program, missile programs, in return for their diplomatic recognition and also the signing of peace treaty, replacing the current armistice agreements. So that's something. I think what they're doing at the moment is they're talking just their principles. We are not ready to talk with South Korea and the United States and even with Russia, because this is non-negotiable at this moment. So we are in the process of talking to each other, negotiation. But when we come to the final, near final point, they will come to the negotiating talk. I think this is not just a speculation, but their chances are pretty good. As we say, at the 11th hour, the real progress comes at the 11th hour. So this is a long process of talking to each other, dialogue with each other, to get a much better positions and their talks with against their counterparts. So I think we just began this long process of context, beginning with the context and dialogue and finally the negotiation. This is something that will take a long time, but in doing so, we have to clear our positions again and again. We really don't want you to continue your nuclear and missile programs, and we want you to be much lower down your provocative actions, so that we can really talk about some alternative options rather than talking very harshly. I think this is something we have seen so far for the last half a year, but hopefully we are going to turn it to a new phase, because all the neighboring countries really want to talk to North Korea about the benefits if they come to the negotiating table. This is the benefits that you're going to get. I think after long thought, and because Mr. Trump's harsh word, I think in some sense it hasn't worked, because somebody called this a kind of very creative ambiguity or kind of confusion, but it has some aspects and some benefits to it. And he has a very excellent staff, as a matter of fact. James Mattis and Kelly. I think they are doing a kind of very comprehensive role to play. So at the top level, they talk very harshly, but his staff talk about a little bit toned down. And then I think the same is true with North Korea. Kim Jong-un talk very harsh words, and Choi Sun-hee, we say we have a kind of multiple dialogue channels open with the United States. This is a kind of very complementary role they're playing at this moment. This is my observation.
But their precondition that the United States has to recognize them as a nuclear state, is it acceptable to the United States? I mean, it sounds like it's never going to happen.
Yeah, I also agree with you, because I think there are two preconditions is to North Korea side and the U.S. side. First of all, North Korea side has the never give up the nuclear weapon. And the U.S. side has a precondition is never accept as the two North Korea to be nuclear power. So we need to analyze of this baseline of the two resolving of these nuclear problems. What is interesting? The North Korea says look at only the U.S. policy. However, the U.S. wanted to deal with China to control of North Korea. This is a big gap between two countries. Because of the Trump have a strong belief that China has power, vital powers, core powers to control of the behavior of North Korea, economically and politically. This is the North Korea's dilemma in this problem, I think.
That's true.
Yeah.
So is there any middle point that sides can meet?
Yes, there are some similar, there are some different. It's a coexistence now.
I see.
Yeah.
Well, now let's listen to the opinions from our American experts. We have Joseph D. Thomas in line. He's a professor of practice in the School of International Affairs at the Pennsylvania State University, and he also worked for the U.S. Department of State. Professor D. Thomas, thanks for joining us.
I'm very pleased to be here. Thank you.
A senior North Korea official said as long as the United States continues a hostile policy toward North Korea, the state will maintain its nuclear program and also ballistic missiles. I think they are aiming at President Trump and his harsh words, and he's mentioning the military options. We wonder how do experts in the United States assess and evaluate President Trump's North Korean policy?
Confused and a bit worried because things can go wrong here. And freelancing, this sort of improvisation by the president could send very mistaken signals or create tensions where there shouldn't be some, or create an overreaction. So I think a number of us are quite worried about the lack of steady hand on this by the president.
So Russia is recently attempting to play the role of mediating between the United States and North Korea. President Putin is emphasizing diplomacy to solve this crisis and the problem. What do you think is a hidden agenda of Russia? And also, do you think Moscow's attempt is going to be helpful to solving the crisis?
I think it's very unlikely that Russia will become a mediator. I think it would be highly unlikely that the United States would welcome such a, given all the domestic disputes and the political disputes surrounding Russia these days, I can't imagine that would be an acceptable mediator to us. And I'm not sure it would be very acceptable to the North Koreans either. However, Russia does have a role. For no other reason than Russia could make pressure campaign against North Korea irrelevant. So they have a role. They have to be involved, as they were in the six-party talks. But I think as a true mediator, that would be quite difficult.
I see. Well, Professor Thomas, thank you for sharing your insight. Well, let's go back to Russia. So Russia has been quiet and reserved and passive on the Korean Peninsula and the nuclear issues. And all of a sudden, President Putin and Moscow is attempting to play the role of mediating. What's the intention of it? Why are they doing this all of a sudden?
I think Mr. Putin has been very active in proposing its own, Far Eastern, they call it New Eastern policy. And President Moon Jae-in also proposed our own Northern policy as well. And there is a lot of good connecting points between two policies. And finally, because we see a lot of opposition by the Chinese leadership when it comes to the missiles and North Korean issues, particularly in terms of deploying THAAD system in South Korea. So I think what Russia is trying to look at is finding a kind of niche market because Pyongyang is not ready to talk with Beijing, and they only talk with Washington, but Washington doesn't want to talk directly with North Korea. So that's why Moscow has been more forthcoming to propose this kind of active mediator role. Even though, as Mr. D. Thomas said, it's very unlikely the United States would accept this kind of Russia's role, because the bad something on domestic politics involving Russian scandal as well. But I think Russia is, because they said we are the alternative source for providing energy to North Korea, because it is not just nuclear energy, but also the electricity the people really want in North Korea. So if they provide oil and electricity in North Korea's economy might revive again, and that will put the kind of comfort on Kim Jong-un leadership, because Kim Jong-un said we are going to develop these nuclear weapons not only because of the weapons per se, but also provide a kind of energy to the people. So I think this is a kind of something they can accept by the Pyongyang leadership. So Mr. Putin made it very clear, because Russia might be the only country that can really meet all the requirements by North Korean leadership, providing energy and providing a kind of security guarantor of North Korean leadership. But Russia has been our neighbor for many centuries, and now is a time for maybe look for some alternative. We have to do every possible means. If there's any neighbors that can really come to the aid of us, then we should welcome them. Okay.
Well, I mean, you said, and also Professor D. Thomas said, the United States is not going to accept Russia's role in mediating. But what about China? I mean, if there's a China again, and China is comfortable with Russia getting in the moderating role?
I think it's fundamentally Russia cannot replace the role of China as on North Korea problems, because economically, political reasons. I think this case, in Moscow law, is important to the region is the both country, North and Russia, is interested met. I think is because North Korea is demand very actively the role of the Russia to recover of the diplomatic isolation, because of the China is for North Korea, as China is changing now toward the sanction attitudes. So I think it's about Russia is also need to the check and balance of the U.S. unilateral powers in this region, and to by through intervention to North Korea's nuclear problems. So I think it's both countries' interest is met, but now fundamentally, as I said, is there are lots of limits to role of the Russia. And Russia is shows these conferences arranging of the meeting or dialogues both countries, North Korea and the U.S. And they wanted to be continue the existing economic cooperation like Najin Hassan as this project. I think it's to stay here, and they don't go far away.
Yeah.
Doctor, going back to the question, I think there is no reason for Beijing to deny or reject the role that can be played by Moscow, because they are good neighbors, because they are both facing a serious, as they call, threats from the U.S.-led coalitions, including Japan, Korea, and Australia, and India, and many other countries as well. So, and they also maintain a very good relationship as CEO of Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and also they had talks at the BRICS conference. So I think to the Beijing leadership, the role that has been proposed by Moscow is something they can really welcome, because they are complementary to each other's role, as long as they can hold the U.S. leadership in check, because they are facing a serious common threat. They, as according to them, a threat and challenged by the United States and its allies. So I think in Pyongyang, there's no reason for Beijing not to accept this kind of mediator role that has been proposed by Moscow leadership.
I see. But what is confusing to me, even though President Putin signed a decree on imposing that intensive sanction on North Korea and kind of start involving in this issue.
Альтернатива дипломатическим методам урегулирования ядерной проблемы Корейского полуострова на основе диалога между всеми заинтересованными сторонами не существует.
But he's still protecting Cheonan and North Korea, and also they are saying that they are going to maintain the economic cooperation with North Korea, for example, like Najin Hassan project. So what is that, like using double two-track or?
I don't know, call this double track or contradicting each other. I think it's very clear, very normal for any country to try to, tackle these two different avenues, two approaches. One is to stabilize North Korea by providing some energies, and also coming down North Korean threats by allowing them for some kind of venue for talks or context between Washington and Pyongyang. So I think in the thinking of the Russian leadership, it is quite normal that they pursue these two tracks, providing one for talks and one for kind of providing alternative energy to North Koreans. I think they are. There's a lot of positive side to it, even though there has some clash of interest between the United States and Russia on different fronts as well. But on this front, I think we have a lot of things in common rather than differences.
Okay. Well, so it seems to be clear that North Korea is not interested in the multilateral talk, but is only willing to talk with the United States on and on. So that's probably why the US President Trump and his visit to Asia is considered to be a very important turning point. So do you think the North Korea will provoke during his 12-day visit to Asia, or is it really, really bad idea?
Yes, really don't know the intention of the North Korea, but as we are experienced of the North Korea's behaviors, so I'm sure as North Korea will do some more powerful provocation during in the future. So this Trump's visit Asia is very important turning point to decide on the direction of resolving of the nuclear issue. I think it's the highlight of this trip is maybe summit talks between China, the U.S. and China, and there's this. After summit talks, the direction will be determined.
So during the visit?
Don't know, but
okay. Yeah, I hate to ask you to be a fortune teller,
but the last experience is the 2009, and the North Korea conduct of the second nuclear test in the reports of the Obama's Asia tour. I think this is we can conclude, but the situation is different. Because it's in Korean Peninsula, as lots of the U.S. strategic assets is deployed now. So the tension is very high. I don't know. So North Korea's leadership is will choice the exact date, but we don't know.
So they will do another provocation for sure, but we are not really sure of the timing, right?
I agree, because they said the later warned that it will launch a new type of provocative action at a random time. I really don't know what's going, because they done the nuclear test already. They fired a lot of ICBM, SBMs. So what is the new type of provocation or provocative action this time, at a random time? You're right, maybe before Mr. Trump's visit to the three countries in this part of the world, maybe after that, or during his visit to Seoul now. So I think they will do something because to gain the world media attention. That's true, because this will be a clash of media between one part, and they want to really, make a kind of breaking news on this provocative action by North Korea leadership again, because that's going to hold if really North Korea wants to eclipse the visit of Mr. Trump to the three countries in this part of the world, they'll do something. Not nuclear tests, maybe a possible ICBMs, because they have not proven yet, because they still have a long way to prove their the power, the old kind of power. So they may do something during this, because he's going to visit Japan, Korea, and China. They might do something. I'm really interested in what's going to new type of provocation will be, but they will do something. Definitely.
I agree with you.
Well, President Trump decided not to go to DMZ, but visit the Camp Humphreys.
Camp Humphreys,
yes.
So I think that's a good idea, much better, because they just opened a new headquarters and they started to relocating all these troops down to Pyongyang. I think the new era, Pyeongtaek era, has dawned again, and it is very highly symbolic. So instead of just visiting DMZ area again, if you visit the Pyeongtaek, the Camp Humphreys, it'll give a tremendous message to North Korea.
I see. Thank you, Dr. Lee, and thank you, Dr. Kim, as always.
My pleasure.
For sharing your insights with us. And thank you all for staying with us. We'll be back next week with the hottest issues on the Korean Peninsula at Peninsula 24. If you want to find out what's happening in and around the Korean Peninsula, now is the time to tune in to Peninsula 24. Thanks for watching.